Hi, this is Mike Herrera, and you're listening to the Voice and Verse podcast.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 6 of the Voice and Verse podcast. I'm your host, Evan Lucy, taking you through the stories behind your favorite songs. This week, I'm joined by Mike Herrera, singer, bassist, and songwriter for punk rock band MxPx and frontman of the band Tumbledown. Since forming back in Bremerton, Washington in 1992, MxPx has been one of the longest-running and hardest-working bands in the punk scene. They've released influential albums like Life in General, Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo, and The Ever-Passing Moment, and they've also been in a Super Bowl commercial. These days, Mike wears quite a few hats. In addition to his time in MxPx, he finds time to regularly tour as a member of the MxPx All-Stars, in addition to fronting cowpunk band Tumbledown. He's also a father and a podcast host. You can find his podcast, The Mike Herrera Hour, every Friday night on Adobe Radio. I caught up with Mike via Skype to talk about how all of these different things in his life work in concert, and why being compared to Jimmy Eat World actually wasn't the greatest thing. Stick around till the end of the show for some news and notes, but until then, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Mike Herrera.
Yourself away from everyone you know. How do you expect relationships to grow? You feel like a character inside a book. The infinite disaster. No happy ever after. No.
Just Googled you earlier today, and
Great.
Never
do that.
I saw somebody called you the James Brown of punk rock.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
Well, you should put that on your business card or something.
That's. I mean, I consider that a compliment. Hardest working man in show business, right?
Absolutely.
That's kind of what he's known for. So
hardest working man in punk rock.
I wouldn't even say that's true. I mean, I think there's a lot of hard workers out there, and it's just whatever makes you happy and whatever steers your boat. You know, you should just put your hands on that and go with it. Hold on tight.
All right, cool. Let's start with this. Do you remember the very first song that you ever wrote?
Yes, I do. It's kind of weird because I've thought about talking about this, and I maybe have once, and I don't know if it was a conversation or an interview, but the song was called Acid Trip, and I was not doing acid at the time. It was just like the song sounded kind of like what I thought maybe an acid trip would sound like.
Okay. So you had the flange turned up or what?
Yeah, it kind of like had that vibe, but it was just such a crappy recording and everything was out of phase. That's why it sounded so bad. Don't get me wrong. There was no actual professional recording of this song. It was maybe a garage recording on cassette. But
does this predate MxPx?
Yes. I got started in music with just a few other dudes that I was just hanging out with, and they were playing instruments. I didn't play anything, so I would sing, and I would just kind of make up lyrics, and I was kind of like getting into the very first song I ever played on guitar was just like a little piece of like Bad to the Bone or something like that. So I was like, That's not so hard. It's pretty cool. All right. So I started getting into bass and a little bit of guitar. But yeah, before MxPx, I'm just talking about literally just kids in a garage kind of just trying to have fun. Mm-hmm. We never played shows or anything. But yeah, I wrote this song called Acid Trip, and it was co-written. Me and my buddy Don at the time. And he was into grunge. We were all into grunge at the time, weren't we? So
that's the Pacific Northwest for you.
Yeah, it was like 1990, and it was before Nirvana had come out. It was before Nirvana had come out, but they weren't far behind at that point.
So then MxPx starts shortly thereafter, I think, around like 92. Is that right?
92 is our official first show.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then the early days of MxPx songwriting, were you just kind of the guy, or was it a kind of a collaborative thing with co-writes, or were you just the guy?
Once I kind of realized, like, I had been writing songs on my own. Once I started learning guitar, I had filled up a couple cassette tapes of just these 2-chord changes songs, like really simple stuff. And I mean, I don't think one song on there I would be proud of. Like, it's pretty embarrassing, but you got to start somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they say.
Absolutely.
Fake it till you make it. As far as that goes, yeah, I mean, to this day, I've pretty much, I think I can count on one hand how many collaborations I've done with MxPx, songwriting wise.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've just always been just the songwriter. I got together with my buddy Andy Husted, and I was like, hey, I want to start a band. And he's like, yeah, but I don't play guitar. I'm like, I know, but you could totally play guitar. And so I kind of convinced Andy to go to the music store, rent a guitar. So he rented a Flying V. It was like a GTX Flying V with that sort of like 80s spray paint splatter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess it would be a lot like Van Halen style, but it wasn't the Van Halen, like Eddie Van Halen red guitar. It was blue.
Okay.
So it was just like a different version of that. But so, I mean, we were well on our way to rock and roll Hall of Fame history. But yeah, I kind of convinced him to just start playing guitar. He started taking lessons and slow going. I mean, it took a while, but I mean, we were all just trying to figure it out on our own. And we met Yuri through some friends, and that was the end of it. We started playing.
That's the thing. There's always kind of that exploration period when you start writing songs where you just like kind of have to learn, I guess, maybe the structure of the way that a song is composed and how all the different parts fit together. And then you kind of naturally kind of stumble your way through it until you have something that you're like, oh, well, I just wrote a song. I didn't even realize it.
Yeah, it's pretty weird because I think back to like when I was, writing in my notebook, putting these songs together. I would sit in my sister's room. She had a stereo that had 2 channels in, like record in, so you could record a cassette with 2 microphones plugged in. And what I would do is I would actually play on a separate boombox. I would record onto the main stereo and like a guitar part, and then I would play overdubs and stuff like that, like extra vocals. Mm-hmm. I would actually play the main song on a boombox into the microphone and then sing into the same microphone the extra vocals. So like kind of like the way the Beatles made their records, right? But probably less sophisticated than that. But it was just like I didn't have anybody to like show me how to do it. It was just you can figure it out. It's not that hard. It doesn't sound good, but hey, it's good enough for me. That's kind of how I just started filling all these tapes up with these songs. And I don't know. Sometimes I've tried to find that tape over and over, and I just have never come across it in all my boxes of crap. But some of me really wants to find it just to see, to compare what I did then and how I remember it in my mind, and does it add up to the same thing? Mm-hmm. A lot of times we try to remember things, and it's just completely different.
Of
you
course.
can kind of shape your memory, but whether it's on purpose or not, yeah. So, but I think it's probably long lost in the bottom of a landfill somewhere.
Well, I did something like that this past weekend. I'm doing the great downsize, the purge, where you just like go through and like, I don't need that anymore. That's been in a box for 2 years. And I found this old CD of my high school band, and I was like, oh, I really want to throw this away, but I got to listen to it just once. And it was even worse than I remember. There's some stuff on there you just, what was I thinking? But then at the same time, you're just like transported back, and you can see the room that you were in when you were recording, and just think about all those old memories just come rushing back. It's wild.
It really is. It's one of those things. Like I was just hanging with my dad the other night. We went and watched UFC. He texted me, and we don't get a lot of time to spend with each other. Away from just the family, it's usually everybody. So on like holidays or whatever. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go watch this thing. We got a couple friends together, and he was asking me, do you remember that house we used to live in before elementary school? Before we went to school. And I was like, yeah, I actually remember a few things. And I was just kind of like describing what I remember, and then I went on to like talk about all the traumatic experiences from like our next house, and like I remember weird things. And he's like, "Oh yeah, you put your head through the window, like the main window of our house." I like fell back or threw myself back. You know, kids doing crazy things, and like put my head through a huge window, like the front living room window. And I didn't get cut or anything. Like it just miraculously was okay. And thinking back, you know, my parents were really freaked out, and I was wondering, why are you so freaked out? I'm fine. But like if my kid did that, I'd be freaking out too. So I get it. It's like all these things come in full circle now that we're adults now, older.
Let's go back to MxPx. You know, Tom joined the band in '95, I think, right before Teenage Politics came out. But you were writing all the songs. What was the process like to bring somebody else in, and how did you work together versus the way that you and Andy worked in terms of a bassist, lyricist, songwriter, and a guitarist?
It's pretty much. I mean, it really didn't change too much. Tom, brought new life, new blood into it. You wouldn't necessarily have to get into why Andy left the band, but a lot of it was just he wasn't as interested in the band as we were. And as young kids, I kind of somehow realized that we should just make a change now. It did hurt our friendship for a while. I mean, we're fine now, but just little things kind of just happened. As far as like the songwriting and everything, I would just bring. Tom was learning songs from Teenage Politics, but he also knew some of our older songs from our first record. And he would basically do what Andy did, which was I'd just go and show them the guitar part, show them the song, and then we would add riffs, or we would, I pretty much had everything written for the most part ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And I've always kind of done that, and sometimes it's as much as like a full band demo, or sometimes I'm literally just showing them in the room, like, this is how it goes. And then, of course, we can change things, and we can add parts or take out parts. I mean, Tom and Yuri always had, and Andy for that matter, but always had an opinion, of course, like, oh, I like this song, let's work on this better, more. And but I always said, if you guys got songs, bring them, and they just never really did. So it's like, okay, and then after a while, years pass, and everybody's just kind of comfortable in the whatever roles they're in. Mm-hmm. So things would definitely be a lot different, I think, if I was, had been in a band where I had a co-collaborator, a co-songwriter. But hopefully, it's just one of those things you never know until you try it. So I have co-written songs with people over the years, and I enjoy doing that. I definitely enjoy doing it. It seems more adult to do that, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Well, no, some people will crucify you for that. It's pure. It's got to be pure and unadulterated. You got to write all your songs yourself. Co-writers get a bad rap, I think. A good song is a good song, no matter who wrote it, I think.
I mean, that's the thing, is like I think about TV shows, anything creative, that we kind of like is part of our everyday lives. TV, movies, even web pages are highly sort of collaborative pieces of work. Even a bio, like if you're writing a story on somebody, you don't just write it out of nothing. You have to go and kind of pay attention to what the facts are and figure out what's the story, and where we're going. So, I mean, I don't know. I think out of necessity, and also just out of the fact that I'm just by myself a lot and I just write songs, I just kind of got used to writing songs by myself. But it is a different dynamic because there's no reason to feel self-conscious. There's no reason to feel embarrassed because you're by yourself. And if you write a part that's really stupid, you can not show somebody.
Exactly.
You can just like, okay, I'm gonna set that one aside.
Do a little bit of self-editing before you get in the room.
Exactly. So I feel like, I don't know what other people do when they write with others, but a lot of times I'll have some strong ideas already there, and then I can add to those, of course. But I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to be like, dude, I got nothing. No, it's like the pressure is on to come up with something really interesting. But that's a whole new dynamic, and one that can be very, very interesting and very cool.
I was reading this thing to kind of go off on a tangent, but I was reading this thing about writers and why, writers procrastinate so much. And it's not the fear of turning in something bad. It's the fear of turning in nothing at all.
Yeah.
It's better to have something that I guess, is bad than to be like, oh, I got nothing.
Well, it's always that curse, you become well known for, an album or a couple different albums, a couple types of songs, your hit songs. And if you don't keep producing, people criticize. If you don't, it's not just about how many songs you put out, it's the quality. And I agree. I mean, you should put out quality. It's very subjective, which is, one of those things you can't really judge it. You can't really quantify it in a lot of times because you're huge fans of what you do are going to hear the songs, even the crappy songs, and usually love them. They just love everything you do, that kind of thing. It's been said that I could fart on tape or on the album and put that out and people would buy it. Well, I mean, that's like there's 3 people that would probably buy that, and then the rest of the people would be disgusted. So if we had Paul McCartney or somebody, the number would go up at least to like 50 people would buy that.
Just out of sheer curiosity alone.
Yeah.
What was the moment for you when you felt like a songwriter, instead of somebody who just like did this for a hobby, probably coinciding with the shift from MxPx as a hobby to being like a career? What was that moment where you're like, okay, I guess I'm a songwriter now?
I was probably managers telling me I was a songwriter, that kind of thing. Yeah, definitely a couple albums in. Once we were more established, doing it more full time. I was out of high school. When I was in high school, we put out our first album, Poking at You, and I didn't really tell anybody. I told a few friends. I didn't tell people that I didn't know. I really would only talk about it when asked. Mainly just because I didn't really feel like it was I don't know. I guess I was self-conscious. I felt like it wasn't my best work and it could have been better. And even though I never said that, but I was always I kind of felt that way. And so I guess ever since then I've been trying to like each album do better and better and better. And of course some people have different opinions on that, but we don't need to get into opinions.
Well, going back to what you said about, the moment where you try to do something different than you had done in the past, and people are going to it's kind of a critical juncture in your career in terms of what people think about it. What was that moment for you? Was it when you got on A&M, when you got on the major label? Was it Ever Passing Moment, which was, a very different sounding record for you? What was that moment in your career where you think that you tried to really kind of branch out and do something different that you had ever done before?
That's a good question. I think it's a must for an artist to just push themselves and to not go with where the crowd wants you to go, but to go where you have to go. And the people that will go with you are the people that you are meant to be, meant to be your listeners, your fans, whatever you want to call it. And it's not for everybody, but it's like when I think of artists that I love that have done really drastically different things, sometimes you like it, sometimes you don't. It's just going to be that way. But if it's true to who they were, like Bob Dylan is a perfect example because he was really big doing the folk scene and playing acoustic. And then when he plugged in, there was this huge uproar about it. He had a band playing with them and people just didn't like it. But he said, no, if you don't like it, fuck you. Or if you don't like it, he just didn't do things for what people, the way people wanted. He did what he felt was the right path for his life. And I guess, it's not always the easiest thing to do. And we all have different situations, but I guess for me, that was, the Ever Passing Moment didn't seem to be like that. It seemed to be just like a progression, and everything was like a nice progression. Even with Before Everything and After, and forgive me, people, if you're listening, you have no idea of the names of my records or whatever. But even with that album, which was after the Ever Passing Moment, before Everything and After, it was seen as this drastically different sounding album, and maybe it sounded different, and maybe the songs were different, but it didn't have to do with just where we were as a band. It had a lot to do with where we were as people, everything we had gone through. I had just met my wife at the time, and just all these things were happening in a different way than from the last album before it. So it's not always on purpose.
Right.
Things can just change, and I've always kind of said this in interviews as well, but the way I write songs is I just try to be true to who I am, and that's not always going to be who you were yesterday.
Or who you'll be tomorrow.
Exactly. So, yeah.
Did you guys have kind of the heavy-handed major label experience where, your A&R guy was coming down and telling you got to write a single, you got to write another single?
We had that subtle heavy hand. It was there, and maybe it was there more than I realized, and I just wasn't paying as much attention. We definitely had quite a bit of fiddling with songs, the way songs were produced, mixed, and that record, definitely, it was before Everything and After. Dave Jordan was the producer. We had a great time with Dave Jordan. He wasn't really the heavy hand at all. It was definitely the record label at that point. It was Ron Fair was our A&R / record label president, and I mean, he really, he's just trying to do his job and trying to just put us through the cookie cutter, just like everybody else. Mm. And one of the funniest things he said was, "Oh, I really like this song." Okay, let me give you a little inside info on this. The single from that album, "Everything Sucks When You're Gone," mm-hmm. was a love song. It was just like any other track on the record. Really shouldn't have been a single, in my opinion. They heard that song and they thought, "Oh, it's got a Jimmy Eat World vibe to it. So let's make it more like Jimmy Eat World, and let's really push this thing." And I think all the goodness got squeezed out of that song, and it just became something that it wasn't.
It feels a little sterile.
Yeah, it does. It does. At the same time, I don't absolutely hate it, but if you listen to demos, that's kind of, it's not drastically different, but kind of feel like it's got a lot more just realness to it, warmth. Ron Fair and the radio person, I can't remember the name of the lady, we were all set to go with, we had a Super Bowl commercial where we had our song on the Super Bowl. It was called Well Adjusted. And that was definitely a departure for MxPx. It was more sort of mainstream rock sounding. But to be honest, it wasn't fiddled with as far as to be a single or anything. It was just a song I wrote. And I wrote it actually on Warped Tour in the back of the bus. And I showed one of the girls from the band Halo Friendly. It's this all-girl punk band. I don't know if you remember them.
That's a trip, yeah, I do.
And I was like, "Oh, check out this new song I got." And to me, on the acoustic even, it just sounded like a punk song. And we were all set to have that as our single. And they're like, no, we really want this. Everything Sucks. We really feel like it's going to do some damage. And, I'm like, yeah, the wrong kind of damage. But so, I mean, there's that was probably the biggest thing that happened label wise, where I feel like it kind of completely derailed what we already had going. Mm-hmm. And we had to kind of start over and redo. And at that point, after that record, we had one more record with A&M, and we actually asked them to drop us, and they did. In retrospect, I should have just done one more record with them and took the money. But
just do it as cheaply as possible and just take the money.
Exactly, yeah. But I was thinking more from a career standpoint, getting out and being free of that and starting over. So that's kind of what we did. But
well, you got a Super Bowl commercial out of it. I remember seeing it might have been on your message board or something like that. It was the commercial's going to air in the first half of the second quarter, sometime in the second quarter. And I remember just waiting by the TV to hear this new song, and it was a 10-second, maybe even less than that. But at that point in time, I was like, "Oh, this is the best MxPx song I've ever heard. It's so good." And I still think it holds up today to being one of your best songs that you've ever written.
Oh, thank you. Wow. That's cool. We're gonna have to bring that back. We haven't been doing it live, so
that's a great one. You mentioned that you wrote that song on acoustic. Do most of your songs start on acoustic?
Yeah, most of them do. And whether or not that's, to be honest, Chick Magnet didn't. But besides that, there's a few songs I've written on bass, and it's pretty obvious. But I think if I wrote every song on bass, then it would just all start sounding cliche. It really is about the chord structure and the melody, and then I add riffs and I add a lot of the extra stuff later. But acoustic guitar, it's just sort of the root for me. It's the beginning.
Did you know when you wrote that Chick Magnet bass line that was like it?
No, absolutely not. I thought it was cool. I definitely liked the bass line. The song itself is very unorthodox. It's got the chorus isn't even the catchiest part, so it's funny how songs like that aren't sort of like A B bridge, solo and last chorus end. Sometimes you just hit it right, but you can't force it. What we did with that song is I would actually, when Tom would break a string on tour, I just started playing that song.
Okay.
And that was like sort of like the breakdown riff I would do in between, sort of just we didn't have a guitar tech or anything like that. And then I ended up actually writing the rest of the song, and I was like, oh, okay, it's a real song now, cool. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we actually were playing it live before it was even a song.
There you go. Let's talk about Tumbledown. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about Tumbledown. Lyrically, when I first heard Tumbledown, I think I was reviewing the record, and right off the bat, I was like, whoa, this is really different, and not even because of the music. Lyrically, it's kind of a shock to your system, given that MxPx, for all intents and purposes, was this kind of squeaky clean brand, as
right.
You guys progress throughout your career. And with Tumbledown, you're singing about drinking and drugs and stuff like that. When you were putting together that record, was there a moment like, maybe I shouldn't do this? Or is it just kind of like the punk rock thing in you? It's just we're just gonna blow down the expectations of what people think that I am as a person or a songwriter or whatever?
That's a great question. I thought I was going to get a lot more flack for it, but it's been pretty low key every now and then. But what I was thinking really was, this is sort of like me as an adult, and I get to start over. So what am I going to do? What's my choice? And I kind of chose, I didn't go extreme. I think, one, I think I would be doing it just to do it. So two, I went back to being honest and going, okay, this is a different band. I have a chance to sing about something different. We're playing, Tumbledown shows are almost always in bars or wineries or house parties. And it definitely started out like that. And people were just drinking all the time. We were drinking all the time, weed, all that, weed, whiskey, and rock and roll was kind of what it was based on. But for me, yes, I did think about it. And I kind of just thought, to be honest, if people have a problem with Tumbledown, then they don't have to listen to it. It's not MxPx. It's a different band. It's, and I'm not going off the deep end. I'm not taking it to an absolute crazy extreme.
Right.
So I wouldn't say I pulled a Miley Cyrus or anything like that, but at the same time, if I would have, maybe it would have been even a louder bang in the scene, and we would have gotten even more notoriety. But I feel like I did what came natural. And being an adult now, I do drink, and I do, go out to bars and
do
all this
adult
stuff.
Things, yeah.
But at the same time, it's funny how like that even runs its course. Like we've put out 2 records, a couple other things, an EP, and for the 3rd record, I was like, I kind of just I don't want to write another record that's basically like the next one in line. So we're pretty much on hiatus. I've written a few songs for Tumbledown and been doing a lot of MxPx touring, and I want to make a solo record. I've been touring. I've been playing solo shows, a lot of private house solo shows I do acoustically, and I do both MxPx songs and Tumbledown songs acoustically. it's really fun. It's a cool place to be. And so like now my next thing is I want to do a solo album. That doesn't mean it's going to be all acoustic. It doesn't mean it's going to be all the same genre of music. I don't know what it's going to be like, but it's got to be good, right? So
it's nice that you have all these different avenues to scratch all the different itches. So you can probably conceivably put something on your solo record that sounds a little bit like MxPx, and it's going to because it's your songwriting voice and your physical voice. But you know, you can also put something. You could probably put a piano ballad if you wanted to on there, or something just like crazy that maybe wouldn't fit on an MxPx record.
I think people are ready for it. I mean, it's got to be good, and it's got to be, I guess it's got to be something that you can own, something that you're not going to later on go, oh man, I can't believe I did that. So, I mean, earlier in your career, that's okay. I mean, I'm embarrassed of many songs I've written in the past, but for something like this, like I'm in my 30s, I've been with MxPx for over like 21 years now, and at this point, I feel like you can have missteps, but if you're going to put out a solo album, it can't be a huge misstep. It's got to be something that not everybody's going to love it, not everybody will be into it that love MxPx or even that love Tumbledown, but on its own, it has to be good. So whatever that is kind of like the question. So I'm kind of just getting started on that. I've been writing, been doing pre-production, and now I'm kind of like starting to record a few things.
Well, you're a very busy man. You've got the podcast, you've got all these things. You're doing MxPx tours and a solo record, and you are a father now. How does that change? How do all of those irons that you have change the way that you write songs? It's not just like, I can just sit here and write songs all day. Do you have to be more regimented and kind of get into a more like 9 to 5 day job kind of process about writing songs, or is it still kind of this just creative spark that takes you somewhere sometime?
That's a good question. It can be frustrating because having a kid is like having like a really busy band. Yeah, because it does take up a lot of your time, and it should. It's the most important thing. It's like parents these days. I won't get into parenting, but for me, songwriting really has continued to be a creative spark, and for that matter, I've done a little less of it. I'm slower now than I probably ever have been, but I wouldn't say I'm worse. Like I feel really good about some of these songs I've kind of like finally managed to put together as a finished product. I'm like, okay, that's done. I'm pretty sure that's done. I'm just gonna keep playing with it. I'm not gonna fiddle with it. But it does take a little longer because I'll be one, more tired, two, less money because I'm not working as much because I am, at home more. Mm-hmm. So all these things contribute, but for me, I still see like, okay, if I really want to songwrite, I can do that. Like I'm not barred by my family. I'm not barred by my obviously I'm just self-employed, that kind of thing. So it's really up to me, I guess. But nighttime is where I really get into it a little bit. But it's definitely not as many hours as I used to work. Like I used to go into like right now I'm in like a little basement studio at my house. I call it MTS2, by the way, or little MTS. But I just have like a little Pro Tools rig down here where I can podcast, I can songwrite, I can literally record vocals if I need to. So sitting down here, I don't get down here until like usually 9:30, 10 o'clock at night.
Okay.
And then I'll go till like midnight or something, and then I'll usually be done. But I used to like start drinking. I would all the time before I had a kid. I would just start drinking that evening and just drink all night while writing. And for that matter, a lot of those Tumbledown songs were probably written with that process. With the MxPx stuff, of course, I write a lot of MxPx in the same way, but I also am writing a lot of MxPx songs on tour, whether it's in the back of a bus, in a hotel room, not as often because usually it's just sleep and then leave. But I've written a lot of songs. Like it's funny, like the songs you write at home, I don't really remember when I've written them, so I usually write it down. But the ones I've written on tour, I can always remember. Oh, I was there. I wrote this Dead Man Walking song on the latest Tumbledown album, and it's one I do a lot by myself live. And I remember writing that song in Melbourne, Australia, in the hotel room. One of the few songs I've written, in the hotel rooms. But I remember exactly what the room looked like. It was this weird, funky motel, and all these weird things about it, So it's like every now and then I'll think of a song and I can go back to where I wrote it, which is kind of cool.
It's like a little vacation.
Yeah, it's a little. I take mini daydream vacations.
Nice. That's awesome. Where do you want to push yourself as a songwriter? Maybe with the solo record.
Doing good songs. That's what I want to get better at.
All good songs.
Writing good songs. Yeah, right. No crap. It's funny because as a songwriter, I have an idea of what a song will be right when I start it. So I'll start with the first progression or even just one chord strum, and I'll be like, okay, this is cool. This could be great. And then I'll write the song, and I'll be like, it sounds nothing like I thought it was going to sound like. And sometimes I'm like disappointed because the idea in my mind, even though it wasn't, you can have an idea of how it'll sound, but still not have it written, I guess. A lot of times it just doesn't end up that way for me. So I think what I want to work on is, I don't know, steering myself in certain directions. And not to say I would be like forcing something, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to force myself. Like I will literally just get up and walk away and go do something else if I feel like it's not working. And for me, it's just repetition. Just come back to it. A lot of people ask, what do you do for writer's block? And my main thing is like, I just don't force it. If you have writer's block, which everybody gets it, to me, I don't even consider it writer's block. I just feel like songwriting comes in waves. Creativity comes in waves because you have to do things throughout your day, throughout your life, your week, your months. You're creative. You have these chores you have to do throughout your day. And so sometimes it can be hard to just turn that on. So I don't really consider myself ever having writer's block, because eventually I'll write another song and I'll be like stoked. All right, cool. It's just a matter of having patience and going out, living life, and filling up that creativity with ideas that you can actually relate to in your life. I don't really like scour the internet looking for ideas. I just go and do things, and then I have something to write about later. So that's my thing.
Why don't you go ahead and plug your Twitter, your Facebook, your podcast? Where can people find you online?
Sure. Well, for all things Mike Herrera, check out MikeHerrera.net. That's MikeHerrera.net. If you're a Twitter person, check me out on Twitter, Mike Herrera TD. And all of the sites that I am part of are just like literally right on my MikeHerrera.net website. There's just links everywhere. In a very easy fashion, not just links everywhere, but
spoken like a true podcast host.
Of course. And check out my podcast. You're going to be on it soon.
Yes.
Definitely want to have you on, and we'll talk about whatever you want to. We don't have to talk about songs. We can talk about droids, whatever that means to you. I don't know.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Alrighty, that about does it for this week's show. I'd like to thank everybody who checked out the episode, and a huge thank you to Mike as well for coming on the show and talking shop with us for a little bit. As he mentioned, he's got a lot of new things coming up, a solo record, MxPx, Tumbledown. So stay tuned to MikeHerreraBestLife.tumblr.com for more information and updates about all of that, as well as his podcast, The Mike Herrera Hour, on which I will be a future guest, and we will talk about some probably interesting things, hopefully interesting. I'm going to try my best. All right, it is time to give away a copy of A Rocket to the Moon's album Wild and Free, signed by Nick Santino, as promised on episode 5. And all you have to do is go to our Twitter page at twitter.com/voiceversepod and follow us and retweet a special tweet. I've gone through and picked a name at random from everybody who did that, and it is time to give away this beautiful CD that I have in my hands here. So let's get a little drum roll going. And the winner is at HumanPotato25. All right, so congratulations. I will be reaching out to you via direct message on Twitter to get your address and get your CD out to you. If you did not win, thank you so much for entering. We will have plenty more giveaways to come, so stay tuned in the following weeks for your chance to win signed CDs, signed memorabilia, and a few other little surprises that are still to be determined. If you would like to stay in touch with us online, here are all the ways you can do so. www.voiceanddiversepodcast.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/voiceanddiversepodcast, or on Twitter at twitter.com/voiceversepod. Check out all those sites, and then come back in 2 weeks when we uncover more of the stories behind your favorite songs. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you soon.